Good evening, PWCS families, and welcome to tonight's Family Engagement Series session. My name is Yanette Boyd, and I am the Supervisor for Family and Community Engagement. Today's session is Supporting Student Success, Understanding New Math Resources and Tools. Today's session will be recorded and is being presented in the requested languages of English and Spanish. We'll begin interpretation once this slide is reviewed in the requested languages. So if you're on your computer, you're going to look for the interpretation button on your control bar. Once you click on it, pick on the desired language. Then your icon should change. If you're on your phone, you're going to click on the join audio and click call over internet. Click on the three dots and more. Click on language interpretation and click on the language you want and done. At this time, the Spanish interpreter will review the slide.
En este momento estamos ofreciendo la presentación en español. Si usted se está conectando desde su computador, por favor busque el icono de interpretación, que es un globo en la parte de abajo del control. Una vez usted la haya encontrado, puede seleccionar el idioma español y luego el icono va a cambiar a ES o español para que usted tenga este canal y pueda escuchar esta presentación en español. Si se está conectando desde su teléfono, por favor haga clic en la parte de audio y luego en la parte de internet y luego haga clic en los tres puntitos y más y luego seleccione interpretación de idiomas en el listado, escoja el idioma español y luego oprima en done o hecho. Gracias.
Thank you. Interpretation will begin.
La interpretación va a comenzar entonces.
Okay, at this time, I would like to introduce our presenters for this evening. Joining us tonight, we have Mr. Christopher Latham. He is the Supervisor of Elementary Math. And we also have Dr. Justin Maffei. He is the Supervisor of Secondary Math. Welcome.
All right, thank you. Really glad that you all could join us tonight. We're looking forward to helping out with some of the changes that have happened within math across Virginia and some of the changes that have happened within Prince William and see if we can provide you some support and how you can support your students at home and understand better some of the things that are happening in Prince William. All right, so our objectives by the end of this session, our goal is for families to understand some of the shifts that have occurred with the 2023 Mathematics Standards of Learning. So every 7 years, Virginia Department of Education updates the standards of learning that students have to learn. And then we'll also talk about how the division's new instructional materials support those 2023 mathematics SOLs. We'll talk about the new assessment tool, Momentum Math, and how to use its data to be able to support your kid at home. And we'll also talk about the new personalized learning platform called SuccessMaker and how your child can use that for meaningful learning. So the first thing we're going to start off with is talking about depth of knowledge. I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what depth of knowledge means. It's often called DOK. So on some of the next slides, if you see DOK, it just stands for this depth of knowledge. It essentially tells you how much thinking a task or question requires, and it's broken into 4 levels. And we'll jump into what those 4 levels are and what those look like in mathematics. So we can see here depth of knowledge in mathematics. This is DOK, or depth of knowledge level 1. This is at a basic level. Students either recall or repeat something they've learned. So there's some examples here that you can see. It could be recalling a math fact, such as the definition of an acute angle. It could also just be multiplying 2 numbers, adding 2 numbers, subtracting 2 numbers. It could be given a formula, apply that formula. It could also be conversions between fractions, decimals, and percents that you see in the middle school level. At the DOK2 level, we're looking for something that where the students are actually using their knowledge, but in a simple way. And it may just involve more than one step. So it may be a routine multi-step word problem. It could be interpretation from a basic graph. And it could also be just translating between tables, graphs, words, and then symbolic notation, or what we tend to see with math, the numbers, the variables, the plus, minus, multiplication, division signs. Depth of knowledge 3 gets a little bit deeper. So students need to think carefully and explain why and make decisions. So they'll have to explain the reasoning behind a mathematical solution, not just solving it, but explain why that works as the solution method or why they came to that answer. At the secondary level, students may use the slope and distance formulas to classify a quadrilateral. So it's not just classifying quadrilateral, it's on a coordinate plane. They have to find two other pieces of information to be able to do that classification. It could also be just solving a non-routine, unfamiliar problem. So applying their knowledge to a novel situation. And then finally, we have 4. This is where students work on complex tasks. These are typically things that happen over a longer period of time. So it could be relating math concepts to real-world applications in a new situation that they've not done before. It could be a project that synthesizes multiple concepts. An example that's listed here is designing a small business plan where budgeting, pricing, and profit projections have to be calculated. So using that same table, trying to show you a visual here of the difference between the 2016 standards of learning, which is the previous set of the standards of learning for mathematics, and the 2023 mathematics standards of learning. So the 2016 standards of learning really were heavily written at the DOK 1 and DOK 2 level. So a lot of the math that we're used to seeing and when we were in school is that DOK levels 1 and 2. Now, when we go to 2023, that has shifted to a more challenging bit of information. So rather than just being at the DOK level 1 and level 2 level, we're seeing a lot more of the DOK level 3 now, where students are having to think critically, having to explain, having to justify their decisions. And we'll look at some of the examples in some of the grade levels, what the 2016 standard said, and what the 2023, the new standard says, how it's different. So here's an example from grade 2. The 2016 standards ask students to demonstrate understanding of the 10-to-1 relationships among ones, tens, and hundreds using manipulatives. For 2023, it's no longer just demonstrate understanding. Now it's investigate and explain. So if we pay attention to those verbs, the level of expectation that the students have to replicate now is a higher level than what they were asked for on the 2016 standards. So it's still working with the same content where they're working with the 10-to-1 relationships. However, the thinking behind it has changed. They have to be the ones investigating. They have to be the ones explaining that 10-to-1 relationship. Grade 4. We have create and solve single-step practical problems with divisions of whole numbers for 2016 standards. For the 2023, now it's estimate, represent, solve, and justify solutions to single-step contextual problems involving division with whole numbers. So we've got represent and justify. So they've got to, in some way, depict either a drawing or physical manipulatives, how they are solving it, and justify. So they have to explain why their solution is correct. An example from grade 7, we've got the 2016 standard that is determine the surface area of rectangular prisms, cylinders using concrete objects, nets, diagrams, and formulas. So essentially, the students are given the formula and they have to plug in and solve for the area of the rectangular surface area of rectangular prisms and cylinders. For the 2023 standards, the students are the ones that actually have to develop the formula. So they're not just given the formula and asked to plug in the numbers. Now they have to actually be the ones investigating and finding what that formula is, creating that formula themselves, building that deeper understanding of how the formula is created. And then finally, we have an example from Algebra 1. In the 2016 standards, there was solve quadratic equations in one variable algebraically. The 2023 standards has made some significant shifts for this one. So not only are we doing the solving that's listed in the first bullet there on the right, we're also determining and justifying whether a quadratic equation has no solution, no real solutions, one real solution, or two real solutions. And then we're also verifying possible solutions, justifying the reasonableness of an answer, explaining the solution method, and interpreting solutions for problems in the context of the problem. So if it's a real world problem, we have to understand how that graph actually explains that real world situation.
So the shift in the standards of learning that Justin was just describing and giving examples of has also prompted for us a shift in the curriculum. So we know we have new curriculum materials that have been adopted this year. And the reason for that is to raise the level of instruction to the level of the standards that the state has now provided us. So our curriculum that we're using in kindergarten through Algebra 2 is called Savvas Envision. The chart on the screen now shows the breakdown of a typical lesson, the structure of a typical lesson for this curriculum. So step one, you'll see is problem-based learning. Then they move into step 2, visual learning, and there's practice and problem solving that goes with that. And then step 3 is for teachers to assess and differentiate. Algebra 1, geometry, and Algebra 2 follow almost the same structure, same components. Their step 1 is to explore. Their step 2, understand and apply. Step 3, practice and problem solving. And then again, the last step, assess and differentiate. So as they go through these steps, you can see the problem-based learning comes first. So all of those standards, all of those verbs that Justin was just going through in the examples, we're leading with problem solving, not saving problem solving for the end as we may have done in years past. So we're going to go back to our 4th grade example where what they were doing in 2016, creating and solving, single step practical problems involving division with whole numbers. And now the shift, like we said, is estimating, representing, solving, and justifying their solutions to single-step contextual problems involving division with whole numbers. So we're going to work through an example directly from the curriculum. We have some screenshots, and we're going to work through exactly what that looks like. I think we chose the elementary example to highlight that this shift and this focus on critical thinking is happening K through 12. So there's no more waiting until kids are older before we sort of introduce them right to critical thinking. That's happening as early as kindergarten. They're asking, students, how did you get that answer? How did you know? What did you do? What were you thinking? So it's really all throughout our instruction now. Kids are being asked to critically think, to justify their answers, to communicate what they're learning at a very different level. So in step 1, which is that problem-based learning or explore, we're really teaching through problem solving or exploration. They're getting a problem that they can access, that they have some prior knowledge that they can activate. They might not know a process or procedure to solve it already. They haven't been taught that explicitly. But the idea is to start with what they know, to help them discover, connect new concepts, really understand what's underneath some of the procedures that they are going to learn in the other steps of the process. This is so important. The division example that we're using is really great for this, because division of whole numbers that they start learning in 4th grade is really the foundation as things get much more challenging when they get into 5th and 6th grade and they're dividing with decimals, and it gets really hard to remember just a procedure if you're not sure what is actually happening. So this is where they're building that conceptual knowledge right along with their fluency with procedures for division. So during this time, what students are doing is they're solving the problem independently. They're working, they have a workspace, they might have manipulatives and materials, tools they're using to help them depending on what the problem is. And then they're discussing their strategies, explaining their thinking with a partner or a group. The teacher at this time is observing what the students are doing, listening to what they're sharing, and identifying strategies that need to be highlighted for the whole group. So this might be something that links to the step 2 learning for the day. This might be something that links back to a previous concept that they want to highlight an example of. This might be a misconception that you notice most of the class is making the same mistake, and you want to highlight it and address it before moving on, to correct the mistake before moving on. As well as supporting off-track students with questioning strategies. Sometimes we call that coaching, right? They'll be coaching the students, asking them questions, not telling them exactly how to do it, but helping them along the way. Just like we've focused on the verbs in the examples, we want to focus on the verbs here: solve and share, model and discuss, critique and explain. So again, those verbs come back around and are very, very important for the depth of what the kids are trying to gain with their learning in this experience. So this is an actual solve and share problem right from the curriculum. Sally's bird feeder holds 6 cups of bird feed. How many times can Sally's bird feeder be filled using a 72-cup bag of bird feed? Use counters or draw pictures to solve this problem and explain how you found your answer. So right off the bat, it's explicitly asking students to model, so using counters or drawing, and it's also asking them to explain how you found your answer. So right off the bat, it's prompting them, letting them know you're going to have to explain how you did it. You need to be able to follow along, explain the steps to someone else, right? And the question comes up a lot: if we haven't taught them how to do division yet, what are they going to do? What do they already know if they don't have, we know this is a division problem and they're not sure how to do division yet. So what we might expect students to do is to use some multiplication strategies that they did learn in 3rd grade and have repeated earlier in 4th grade. That might be repeated addition, that might be related facts or number relationships. So they might have a sense of how many times 6 goes into 72 already, because they have learned about multiplication. They might do some repeated subtraction. They might start with the whole number and they might take groups away until there's no more left, and then they will know how many groups they can create. And they've also done some work in every grade level, kindergarten until now, with number patterns and what we call algebraic thinking. So they have an idea of if I start with 6 and I continue to go, that's a pattern that's repeating. It's a pattern that will I can keep going until I get to 72 and see how many groups I have, right? So they do have quite a bit of background knowledge, even though we may not say they know how to do division, right, at this point as they're just getting started. So on the next slide, we have an example of what a visual might look like, what a student might do with their counters or with their drawing. And then on the right-hand side, a sample of what the explanation might sound like, right? So you can see the cups literally drawn or represented with counters. And I drew a picture of a bird feeder. I kept adding 6 cups at a time, 6 plus 6 plus 6, until I got to 72. And then I counted and very nicely labeled the groups of 6 and realized that I had counted 12 groups of 6. So they know that she can fill her bird feeder 12 times. So this is something where a student is not even necessarily aware that they're doing division, but really can understand the underlying concept, right? They understand that they have broken the whole number down into groups and can express that, right, in their visual and also in their explanation. So this is a really important skill. Where you might see mistakes along the way, you might not see them label the number of groups along the side. So they might do all of this work and they know they've gotten to 72. They may not be sure what the answer is because they didn't count along the way, or they're not sure what the groups are. That might be a place where the teacher will step in and ask some questions, right? Coach them along just to get them to take that next step. If that's something that you see quite a few kids doing, that might be something you highlight for the whole group, right? That might be something you take away and say, everybody's stuck at that step. I want to make sure that we understand that, because as we move into the learning part of this, it's where we're going through some more explicit strategies. So this would be a good place to highlight that strategy. Okay. And then they'll move into step 2. This is the visual learning, or the understand and apply. So this is the learning bridge. This is really where we're taking all of that prior knowledge, problem solving that we just worked through, and now we are applying some new learning, some explicit strategies, right, for the students. This is typically a very, very short portion of the lesson. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. So we're not overloading students with a lecture. We're giving them just a bit of information to add to the information they already have, and then some opportunities to practice down underneath that, right? Like we said, it's connecting students' thinking and solutions from step 1 to the new ideas in the lesson. And it's explicit in the curriculum. It's not left to chance that students take away important math in step 1 that is connected to the learning they're going to do in step 2. So those problems are explicitly chosen to lead into step 2. That's how those parts of the lesson work together. Okay. This is a visual. Often the learning bridge in elementary school, they have videos that teachers will choose to use that will narrate and go through a problem and explain and show a strategy. We just took some screenshots here to show what this will look like. So again, they're working through a real world context problem. They're using numbers that are different but similar, right? Are going to work out evenly because they're not working with remainders yet. So the numbers in the problems are also really purposefully chosen to be at the level of the standard, right? If this was a 5th grade example, the numbers chosen would be different because the standard is higher in 5th grade. Same in 3rd grade. If this was a multiplication problem, the numbers would be a little bit different because the standard is a little bit different. So really purposefully chosen problems, purposefully chosen numbers. And then it goes into showing them how they might be able to solve this problem, how they might be able to model it. So you can see in that first diagram, it's explaining what's there. And then in this example, it asks them to, how many groups of 3 counters could be taken away from 63? So they're starting with the whole and they're subtracting groups out, right? They're making those groups. In the first example, the student added them up. And then in this example, they're taking them away. And they're going to see how many groups that they have, which is the fundamental idea behind division, and a strategy that they'll call partial quotients, right? Where you can do the division in pieces. And the goal is making the pieces larger and larger as the kids go. So it's more and more efficient of a strategy. Then they'll move into practice and problem solving. So this is their opportunity to practice with feedback from the teacher. So they may have some independent practice where they're applying what they just learned, the skills that they just have gotten, worked on together, to some new problems. There's also some word problems. So they'll have some just numbers problems for practice that helps with procedural fluency. So they're really practicing with just the numbers, no context at that point. And then we know, based on the standards, the context is so important. The real world problems are so important. Explaining, justifying, thinking through their answers. Are their answers reasonable? Is so important. So there's some word problems as well. Teachers will decide how many practice problems they might do, how many they might assign for independent practice. If this was the first day, they might decide they're going to work on 1 or 2 with a partner or a group to make sure that they're on the right track. They might use some of these to check and gather some data. So they have some information about how the students are doing, what they might need to work more on, which students might need some additional help, which students are moving quickly through the concept and can go a little bit further faster. That's all wrapped up into this practice and problem solving section. And then they'll move into the next step, which is assess and differentiate. So using the quick check and some differentiated resources to support each student based on their needs. So this is, again, really where the teacher's gathering this data, wants to know who was able to master the lesson that they learned that day, probably multiple lessons over the course of the week. They might be pulling students into small groups to reinforce some of the concepts based on this information. They might be assigning specific review questions or practice problems to certain students to make sure that they are getting the practice that they need, getting the review that they need on certain concepts. So this is a really, really important portion of the lesson. The way that the math block of time is constructed, there's less time spent at the beginning to really allow as much time as possible to do this work that's differentiated for students, that's trying to give them exactly what they need at exactly the right time to help move them forward. And then we wanted to mention here a little bit about how families can support this work at home. So I think we're gonna go out, and Justin, if you want to do that, I can explain as we go. We're gonna actually navigate directly to the page. So our page, math.pwcs.edu. And as you see the page, if you choose math curriculum from the menu, and then whichever level that you're looking at, if you have an elementary school student, middle school, high school, if you have multiple students, you can come back as many times as you need to. And then choose the appropriate course or grade level for your student. After each overview paragraph, you'll find a link to the Savvas Envision family resources. You'll see the unit sequence. You'll see that's our Prince William County unit sequence. This will match with the assessments that students are taking, the unit information you'll see. And there's links there to family resources that you can use for each of those, that align with each of those units, all of the concepts. Yep, each different topic, each different lesson. It will have some information at the front. That's really for the adult. That's explaining to you, here's how this was explained to students. Here's how this has been shown to them. It's giving some background information and some background knowledge if you're trying to do some support and some help at home. Give some ideas for connecting the math. So there's lots of opportunities, especially in elementary school, to be doing math in everyday things, right? Everywhere they're looking, there is math. So this helps really connect without the need for lots of extra materials, without the need for any specialized equipment, anything like that. Really things that can be done readily at home. Okay, there's some videos to support, videos that you can play right at home. It will show that visual learning. It will show what they call another look. So it will give you kind of a second explanation. And then there are some practice questions. You could pose this to your child and see how they do, see if they're able to break things down together. And all the materials that you need, you can see listed there, is just paper and a pencil. So they really do a good job of trying to keep it simple. If you needed something for them to count, any everyday objects would work for this. And they can draw the blocks. They've been using the blocks enough from kindergarten up through second grade that they know what they are, how they're represented, and they can use that as a strategy if they would like to.
I would also say at any level, the best thing that you can do with your student at home is just be curious about what they're learning. You know, we talked about the justification being a big piece of it. As students are solving problems at home, just ask them, how did you get that? How do you know that that's the correct answer? That's going to help build that justification or the explanations that they are going to be expected to do within the classroom.
All right. So we do want to spend a little bit of time too, along with the new curriculum. We have a new assessment this year that students have now taken twice. They've taken at the beginning of the year and now at the middle of the year, called Momentum Math. Okay. So Momentum Math's an online adaptive test that shows teachers what your child already understands and where they might need some extra support. It works along with the Envision Math curriculum and a program we'll talk about next called SuccessMaker. This helps schools create a complete connected math learning experience, all the curriculum tools working together. Okay. So this assessment is given to all students grade 1 through Algebra 1, 3 times a year, as I mentioned, beginning of the year, middle of the year, which has just passed in January, and then once more at the end of the year. The most important part of this is that this is an assessment really focused on growth. It shows their current performance, but the most valuable data that we get, and you'll see in the parent reports that are coming home soon, that it gives information about their growth from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year. It will do the same from the middle of the year to the end of the year when we get that information. Because of that, students will very often see questions that are not explicitly taught in their grade level. So a third grader taking this test, if they're performing above grade level, they might see questions that are about standards that aren't taught until 4th grade. Because what the program is trying to do is trying to adapt to them. It's trying to understand what they know. And some of the information they know may be above their grade level. They may be accelerated in that way. So we know that has caused a little bit of frustration, and teachers are helping kids work through, what happens when you see a question that you don't know the answer to? What happens when you get to something and we haven't taught it yet, we haven't learned it yet, and how do you work through that? Because it's really trying to get an accurate picture of what students know and where they're currently performing, regardless of their grade level. It adjusts in the other direction too. So a 3rd grade student, if they're performing below grade level, might see questions that are on 2nd grade standards of learning, because again, it's trying to get an accurate picture of what they do know to work up from there. Give that information to the teacher so the teacher can be supporting them in the areas where they need support. Okay. This is one part of the student report that you'll see. This is their overall score. And it gives each one you get gives a description. It gives these are scaled scores, so it gives you some performance indicators. So there's a does not meets expectations range, and approaching, meets or exceeds, and a score range for each of those. Students at the beginning of the year most likely would have been in the does not meets category. So a 3rd grader at the beginning of the year was taking a test that was asking them questions about all the things that they're going to learn in 3rd grade this year, right? To get a baseline for their learning. We're not expecting that they would know all those things, because that's what their instruction is going to be focused on throughout the year. At this point in the year, what we'd like to see is we'd like to see a lot more students into that approaching category, knowing that they've made growth. Some may even be in that meets or exceeds category, depending on how fast their learning is happening. So this is really good information for you to have. And every time you get the score reports at home, those are always good data points, talking points for a parent-teacher conference if you have questions or if you have concerns about any of the information in there. Okay, and then this will be part of the middle of the year and the end of the year parent reports. You'll get a report on your students' growth. So not just their performance, not just the level that they're at, but their growth. So what you may see, depending on their profile, is you might see that if they're here in the does not meets, they may be in the approaching category, but you can see their trajectory of growth. You can see that they're really making growth. What we talk about quite a bit is the profiles of students, right? If I have a student that's at the does not meet category at the beginning of the year, I really want to see them making progress by the middle of the year into the end of the year on that upward trajectory. I get concerned if I at any point see them not making progress, right? And not continuing on that path. Similarly, you might have a student, child of yours, who came in and is already in the meets category right off the bat, right from the beginning of the year. I want to see that they continue to make growth, right? I get concerned if I see a student, maybe they are green from the beginning, they're green in the middle and green at the end. But if they haven't made much growth, I'm concerned that they could have done more, right? I'm concerned that they could have gone further. And that they may be stuck for some reason at that level. So looking at the growth really does give a lot of information in addition to just the performance level. And then the last portion of this is the performance by domain. So broken down into different areas of mathematics, you'll get some specific information. You'll get a separate score for each one that gets averaged together into their overall score, but you'll also get some strengths and some areas for improvement. So teachers also have this information. So this is something they may be using to group students together. This may be something that they're using to give specific lessons or specific practice, right, to individual students, knowing what they need. This is also something you can use at home, right, to help guide any extra practice you're doing, any extra activities you might try to do at home. You'll get an idea where students are strong and where they might need some additional work.
All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is SuccessMaker. And SuccessMaker offers targeted adaptive math practice. So the difference between the Envision program, which is what's taught on a daily basis, it's on grade level. SuccessMaker targets students exactly where they're at. So if a student is performing below grade level, this will adapt below grade level and provide them the support to bring them up to grade level. If a child is above grade level, it's also going to meet them there and provide the support. So this really is that direct target for each child. You get the on grade level support from the classroom. This provides that additional support exactly where your child is. So it could be fact fluency. It could also be real world problem solving. We really need to see that balance between the two. It's not just all real world problem solving. It's not all the critical thinking. It's also, we have to understand those foundational concepts that continue to build and build and build. It adjusts in real time, so as students are progressing, it will go a little harder, or if they're struggling on a concept, it may back off a little bit. It delivers targeted practice. It also provides some helpful tools, and sessions last about 15 to 20 minutes. There's hints, there's corrective feedback, there's animations, there's also translated support for multilingual learners. So really trying to make it as accessible to everybody as possible. And it can be done on a desktop, a laptop, or tablet devices. So in terms of SuccessMaker, how you can support, provide a quiet, focused workspace for them at home. Avoid helping during problems, and this is one of the most challenging things as an adult, to not jump in and help the child. Instead, have them listen to the character or the cognitive coach that is part of this program, because it's built to ask them questions to move them forward. It's not going to give them the answer. It's going to keep building their knowledge so that they continue to move forward, but also recognize that they're the ones doing the thinking and they're the ones building their understanding. Reassure students it's okay if they get some things wrong. I think of this like weightlifting. If I go into the weight room and all I'm doing is lifting up this mouse, I'm not building the muscles. I need it to be enough that it's a challenge for me so that those muscles build. It's the same with the brain. We need it to be students in their learning zone, and their learning zone, their scores will typically range 65% to 80%. So they're going to be missing some problems, and that is absolutely okay. That's telling us we're in the range that they need to be to continue moving ahead. So here are the things that will be needed for your student to be able to access this at home. A steady internet connection, so about 1.5 megabytes of per second speed would be the minimum connection. Speakers or headphones, so there are those videos as we mentioned, so they'll need to hear those. A browser capable of launching SuccessMaker. And then some scratch paper when working in SuccessMaker Math. So these are this program is assigned within Canvas by the teachers, and they can access it that way. So they will be able to access it at home as well and do some work within the platform. So really just wanted to sum up what we talked about today. We talked about three different but integrated pieces of Savvas. These are all part of the Savvas platform. So Envision is the math series. It's the core curriculum. We're building conceptual understanding, well, like we mentioned, the problem-based learning, the visual modeling, the real-world application. This is the classroom instruction. The classroom instruction is built off of this Envision math series. Momentum is the assessment suite. So we use it to diagnose needs, help guide our instruction, and connect students directly with curricular materials based off of their needs from that data. And then finally, SuccessMaker, the one we just talked about, is an adaptive intervention. It really meets students where they are and personalizes their learning specifically for them, adjusts to them moment to moment. So regardless of where your child is, it helps to accelerate them. It helps to move them forward with their understanding. We did the overview of the three of them. We are happy that you were able to join, and we'll turn it back over to Ms. Boyd.
Thank you guys so much for this information. I myself have a middle school student and a second grader, so I was listening intently because this is great information for everybody. And so one of the things that we're going to do is we are going to open up the chat if you guys have any questions. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them in the chat. We will see them, and then we'll have Justin and Chris answer any questions that you may have. So we'll give you a minute or so if you have any questions. All right, so one of the questions that just came in, where can we access these resources?
The resources for the family engagement piece or the presentation in general?
Family engagement piece, and I believe Tracy, our ITC, just put the link in the chat, and I will make sure that everyone who registered will get a copy of today's presentation. You'll get the video recording, and I'll also make sure, even though I know the link is or the website is included in the presentation, I'll make sure that I include it in the email so that you have access to that. Let's see. Do middle school students have textbooks for math?
Yep.
Okay. And I assume they would reach out to their teachers should they need the physical, I guess, book. Is that the case?
Talk to their teacher about that.
Perfect. Are the math platforms free?
Yes, they are part of what was purchased with the division adoption and purchase, so they are free for our Prince William County students.
Okay. Another of the questions says, is there SOL help? And I believed when I went and looked at your resources, you had some information there to support that SOL, correct?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a there are a couple things that you can do for that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So you'll have the momentum results. That will really give you a good indication of the areas that your child could use additional support in. And then that family engagement site that we showed you, that's from the math.pwcs.edu site, you can go right in there to kind of match up where your child may have been struggling, what the skills are within that area. So that's another area that you can look for that additional support for SOL as well.
Perfect. Another of the question said the county is pushing Khan Academy use. Do you recommend SuccessMaker over the Khan Academy for the math?
SuccessMaker is grades K through Algebra 1. So if it's above Algebra 1, it's not available for students. If a student is in Algebra 1 and needs support, it's something that will kind of depend on the area that the child needs support in. If it's on grade level material that they need the most support with, it probably would be Khan Academy would be the more appropriate support. It will provide more Algebra 1 specific support. SuccessMaker really is the one that will help build any foundational concepts that may be missing, though.
What is your recommendation on how long maybe students should spend on these platforms outside of school?
So SuccessMaker in general, I'm going to couple this with another question about using it outside of school. Our primary push is for students to be getting these minutes in school, right, during the school day. And we know some families would like students to do additional work at home that might help accelerate their learning. It might help close gaps that they have. So the benchmark set by the company is that students are aiming for 60 minutes a week. That's their in-school time that we're hoping to find. We know that time is tight, right, during the school day. So teachers and schools are trying everything they can to find those minutes. So I would say, especially for elementary, I would say no longer than 15 or 20 additional minutes at home. That is plenty to help supplement without making this too challenging or too repetitive for them, or overloading them, right? Since they've been at school already working all day. So I would say no more than one additional session at home, about 15 or 20 minutes.
Question about accessing SuccessMaker through ClassLink. It is not through ClassLink. It would be shared through the teacher's Canvas system, their Canvas module. So you might have to check with your teacher on how your child will access it directly for them. There's also a question about whether SuccessMaker will work outside of assigned work. It is supposed to be adaptive for the student, but a teacher can assign work. So they should be able to do both. So they should be able to work on the stuff that is data is driving them to, but also if a teacher assigns something directly to them as well, they can do that. So it should work outside of the assigned work as well.
Yeah. There's another question about balancing the support with SuccessMaker, which is that individualized pathway, which might be disconnected from what the current instruction looks like in the classroom, right? And where's the balance there? I think part of that is really just thinking about what students need. That might be using some of the reports, assignments that are graded, things that are being sent home. It might also be in conversation with the teacher about what they need most. Do they need to work on some of those underlying skills or those fundamental things that SuccessMaker may be taking them through, even though that's off cycle with the current instruction? Or do they need some support with what they're currently learning in the classroom, some additional practice that will help move them forward? So I do think it's a balance. I don't think it's all one or the other. And there's some data points and in conversation with the teacher to try to navigate that, which can be, we know can be challenging, just to make sure kids are getting what they need.
All right, we'll take maybe a couple more questions. Let's see. One of the questions that came in, is the standard the same for like students who receive special education services?
Would depend on if they are SOL tests on the SOL test pathway or on the VAP pathway. So a special education student may be in the general education classroom with the other children, and then the expectations are that they would meet the same standards. If a student is on the VAP profile, then they would receive alternate standards of learning. So there are some modifications based off of the student's disability.
And then how soon after a Momentum math test are parents able to access the results?
The results get sent home by the teacher. So it depends on when the class has completed it. So we've provided the guidance of the parent letter that gets sent home with it and which report gets sent home. So the window for the middle of year momentum assessment closes at the end of this week. So those letters, if they've not arrived at home, they should be coming in the near future. If you don't receive it in the near future, I would reach out to the teacher and request the report from Momentum.
And one of the questions that was asked is, how do we know what is currently being covered in the class? I would say definitely reach out to your teacher as well. They should be, sending out information, but you are more than welcome to reach out to the teachers as well, just to get more information on what's being covered in the classroom. So
I would also go back to that curriculum page that we brought up. The unit sequence is in order there, and it's broken into the quarters. So you would at least know what units are scheduled to be taught within each of those quarters.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you coming on. This was some really, really good information. We will be posting the link for our survey in the chat. Please just take a couple of minutes just to fill that out to let us know how we're doing. And again, you'll receive a copy of today's presentation, the video recording, as well as the resources that were provided by Dr. Maffei and Mr. Latham. And so thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.